Hi, I'm James and this is my 2010 Mini R56, and in today's video I'm going to talk you through the pros and cons of ownership for the last 6 months and things that you'll need to consider if you're thinking of buying one. Let's get to it. Now, I bought this car in September 2020, so I've had it just over 6 months and I've done 2,000 miles. And it's actually my second Mini. I had a previous generation Mini before that, and I wanted to try this, the R56, the second generation. And it's not by any means a bad car, but it has some issues that I think need discussing because they're not the things people talk about. But before we go into some of the negatives, let's talk about some of the positives. I think the R56 is the best looking Mini that there has been to date. I really like the shape and the style and the size. The first one was a little bit too small, the subsequent ones are a little bit too big. So this is the Goldilocks size for Minis in my opinion. This is a Camden edition, so it got a lot of interesting extra spec, which I'll talk through in a moment, but it also got this really nice horizon blue paint. There were some other colours as well, sort of a silver white and a black, and it also got these smart alloy wheels. Now they are 17-inch, and like all Minis of this era, they came with run flat tyres, and again, I'll cover that momentarily. But overall, lovely package visually, really nice looking car. Let's head into the interior and I'll talk you through some of the additional features of this model and the sort of things you can expect to see when looking at any other R56 Coupe model. So here we are in the interior, and I'm very fortunate in that the first owner of this car specified it with leather seats, which is a real benefit. Normally these seats in a Camden edition are half leather, half cloth with white bits on the bolsters. Leather seats in a Mini you might think is a little bit unnecessary, but it's just one of those things that makes it feel that little bit special and is the reason to buy a Mini over another car of this size. In addition, this particular car also comes with the heated seats, so you get the benefit of the leather and none of the negatives of them being cold in winter. In addition, the previous owner also specified the multi-function steering wheel, which is great. So you've got your stereo controls on this side and you've got your cruise control on this side. And again, that was also an option, cruise control on this car. The Camden edition specifically also gained Harman Kardon speakers, so the stereo sounds really good. It got xenon headlights at the front, and it got some other additions like this white trim over here, and there's some white trim on the doors that's specific to the model. Plus, of course, those alloy wheels that we've talked about. So overall, it's a really well specified car. You've got CD player, you've got climate control, and you've got your classic, slightly confusing Mini switchgear. And that's something I want to cover a little later on. But overall, a really nice interior package if the size suits you. It's well appointed in here and it's finished nicely. There are some gremlins. This here, for example, has broken and come loose, and some things do feel a little bit brittle. If you're used to an Audi interior, which is beautifully damped and beautifully made, you will find issue with some of this interior. It is not perfect, and some of these plastics are hard and a bit scratchy. But given the price point, I think it's a pleasant place to spend some time. So far so good with the Mini. We've got two pros there, great looks and great spec if you go for one of these models, and even in the normal Coupe you're not under-specced. Things start to go amiss though when you start actually trying to interact with some of those features. And let's talk about the stereo. And there's a knob here, all with the stereo controls, and you think that's what you use to turn the car radio on. But you don't. You use this knob down here, which is very counterintuitive. And this is our volume control. And when you're thinking about it, that's absolutely fine. But when you're driving along, what happens is you end up doing this. And then you end up tuning to in another radio station. And all sorts of things happen like that. And that's infuriating. Why they couldn't integrate the volume control into this control up here, I don't know. And since we're talking about this, let's continue this. That's obviously the speedo, and that isn't where you normally look when you're driving. And I know why they put it here, because it makes life easier when you're doing left and right hand drive, and because kind of it's a Mini thing, isn't it? And this kind of whole let's make it like a Mini thing kind of makes it a bit less usable. I'd much rather the speedo be in front of me and be that size and the rev counter be that big. That would be absolutely fine. I don't need to look at the rev counter very often, but in speed restricted in the UK with speed cameras on every corner, you need to know what speed you're doing. And so what you end up doing is having it as a tiny little
digital display here over here is speed, and effectively I never look at this. It seems pointless given how enormous it is. Let's go for a drive and I'll talk to you a bit more about some of the other suspension and engine issues that I've identified.
So I spoke about those alloys earlier, specific to this model of Camden, and they are 17-inch. And of course, like all BMWs these days and of that era, they are equipped with run-flat tyres. And we know that run-flat tyres do nothing for the benefit of a ride. But what is surprising about this car is just how awful the ride is. It really is terrible. Now, I used to have a Mini Cooper S, previous generation, R53, and that equally had a terrible ride, but that was an S, that had a decent slug of power, and that sort of made sense. And in actual fact, I took that car on a couple of track days, and it was much better at being a track car than it was at being a road car. Problem though with this car is that it doesn't have the benefit of being the fast model, so you get all the disadvantage of a tough ride without any of the sparkle from the engine, and we'll come to the engine in a minute. It seems to me though that it's a combination of kind of firm springs, kind of probably in this case slightly old dampers, car's done 95,000 miles after all, and I think that's just how Mini have set it up. It's supposed to be a great handler, darting around roundabouts. Here's a roundabout I'm coming up to now, and absolutely when you can throw it in like this, it sort of clings on gamely and doesn't particularly roll. But of course the Mini, in my sense, or my point of view, is it's really just a sort of urban runaround. And anyone who lives in the UK knows that our urban roads are frankly appalling. Certainly where I live they are. And a car that's good for an urban environment really needs much, much softer suspension, in my opinion, to deal with the very, very craggy roads that we've got here. But what surprises me is how popular the R56 was. They sold thousands of them in the UK, and I'm totally on board with the sporty Cooper S jobbies being firm in the ride stakes, but the fact that a fairly ordinary Cooper like this has such a sort of bad ride really surprises me. And how did all those people tolerate it? Just don't understand why all those people called Emma who worked in marketing in 2010 who were buying Mini Coopers would have tolerated this. They must have never actually driven one before ordering one, because if they had, and they were making a proper decision about it, they wouldn't tolerate this, surely. It's awful, awful. Now, one of the other benefits of the Mini, if we do a positive to offset a negative, is how nice and small it is. So when you're doing a little errand like I am doing here, lovely and easy, nice and manoeuvrable. I've got rear parking sensors, and it's yeah, great in an urban environment. That's why the Mini makes so much sense in an urban environment. It's small, it's easy to drive, it's got power steering, nice and easy to park. Why they plagued it with such a terrible ride, I do not know. This car replaced a Fiat Bravo from 2010. It was a wonderful car, that, for a couple of reasons, one of which was it had a 1.4 turbocharged engine, I think similar to the ones you get in 500 Abarths, and it put out 150 horsepower, and it was an absolute peach. This engine is not. It's got a really weird power delivery where it's kind of got a mid-range dip, which doesn't help. And it's got full service history. This car has had 13 services, all from the same dealer, so it's a great second-hand buy for someone who's going to buy it. But I think it's just inherent in the engine, and it is what I would call a bit asthmatic. It has no sparkle, it really doesn't sound very good, and it's okay. I mean, 122 horsepower, it feels like it's got that amount of power, and it certainly moves along okay, but there's absolutely no joy in it at all. And again, the whole point of owning a Mini is it to be fun, and you zip around, it's all lots of jolly good Britishness, even though it's designed in Germany. And I'm at some lights, let's give it the beans. There's the ride being terrible, and it just, the two things that are supposed to be sort of standout features of Minis in this particular car, well, I'm sure this is true of any 2010 Mini Cooper R56. It's just, no, they're really, really no good. And I know it sounds like I'm moaning, and I am. And I'm moaning because I'm really disappointed. I thought these were popular because they were really good. And I think they're popular because people like the looks of them. And after 6 months, admittedly only 2,000 miles, I genuinely cannot wait to move it on and buy something else, because I just find it so uninspiring. And oh, it's not even. But let's talk some more positives. So firstly, you'll see behind me some children's car seats. My children are 7 and 5, and they're both in high back booster seats, and 2 Isofix mounted high back booster seats fit in the back of a Mini with absolutely no problem. And my kids kind of are completely fine with getting in the back seats, you know, tipping the seat forward. It's a bit of an adventure for them, a mini adventure if you like. So as a car for ferrying the children around, they're always very comfortable here. It's a bit of a hassle putting the seats forward. It would be easier with 5 doors, but it's completely manageable and completely doable. The boot, as you can see in this shot here, is okay. It takes a couple of bags of shopping. No one buys a Mini for capacious luggage carrying capability, but of course you've got the benefit of fold down seats. That obviously not so easy when your back seats are filled with car seats for children, but it's these are the compromises we must make as parents. So now I'm back from the driving, let's talk about another pro to offset those cons. This Mini is powered by the N16 engine, that 1.6 Prince unit, and we've talked about power delivery and all of that kind of thing. I suppose one of the other pros though is that it is a very common engine, and access to parts for this car has been really, really easy. It hasn't been particularly unreliable. I've needed to do disc and pads all round. I changed a couple of trim pieces that are broken. I had to replace a rocker cover gasket, more on that in a moment. But all of those things are easily available from local BMW dealer and or your third-party supplier. There's enough of them around that there's no issue with parts. Now let's talk about that rocker cover gasket. Now unfortunately this car, although it's done just under 95,000 miles, I've had to replace the clutch during my ownership. And that is simply because the rocker cover gasket started leaking. It's only £40 even from BMW for that part, but because it was leaking for some time before I, or indeed the BMW dealer who serviced it recently, noticed, the oil dripped down and through the bell housing and contaminated the clutch. Unfortunately, the clutch was toast, so I've had to do that. So it's something to be aware of. Keep an eye on your rocker cover gasket and your oil consumption. And these engines do tend to use a bit of oil, so it's a bit difficult sometimes to tell whether you're losing it or burning it, but keep your eye on it. So what can I make of this Mini adventure of my own? Well, as I mentioned earlier, I have been disappointed with this car. It's a nice looking car that's well spec'd, but unfortunately the combination of the engine and the ride just ruin it for me, and I don't remotely look forward to driving it. A lot of the spec that's in it now I've had in previous cars, so it doesn't really offer me something that I didn't previously have, but that might be different for you if you're coming from something much more entry level. It's got everything I always used to have in a car, except here the ride is bad, the engine isn't very interesting to use, and I kind of don't see the point of it really. And I think people need to be aware that although the R56 is hugely popular in the UK, there are absolutely some limitations and some issues with it as a car. It is not comfortable and it isn't fun to drive if you've got one of these relatively low powered models. Well, that's my opinion anyway. I'm sure other people will think differently, and I'm sure you will tell me in the comments that I am wrong. But I have not particularly enjoyed this 2,000 miles in 6 months, and I am particularly looking forward to moving it on and getting into something that suits my needs better. As always, thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you find these videos interesting. I'm not expecting everybody to agree with me, but please be gentle in the comments if you think I'm barking up the wrong tree. But if you like this kind of content, do consider subscribing. It really helps the channel. If you've liked this video, do let me know by hitting like and leave me a comment. And I look forward to coming to you in another video very soon. Thanks and goodbye. You find me in the Mini, and you may have thought the episode was over, but no, I'm selling this car as I mentioned, and I put it in for an MOT test, and unfortunately it failed. and it failed on leaking front dampers. In fact, one was so bad that it basically had no oil in it at all. I have fitted some new dampers and I have just literally got it retested and it's passed. And I'd be very happy if I was going to be telling you that the ride was massively improved and it was a significant addition to the quality of the car, that it was loads better, but unfortunately it isn't. I fitted 2 brand new dampers by Saks. They're a good brand, I've got them on my other cars, but no, it really isn't. It's just it's a little less crashy, I'll give it that. The dampers are definitely doing some damping, which I don't think they were before, but the ride quality is still way too firm for a car for this purpose, for just zooming around in the urban environment. So it wasn't bad dampers after all. I think it's just inherent in this car's makeup that it's got firm springs, it's got run flat tyres, and it's just a firm ride. And so whoever buys it, because as I said, I'm selling it, is going to have to either love that or tolerate it. But I can't. And unfortunately for me, as I mentioned before, it's just no good. So thanks for watching this last little epilogue. And I look forward to coming to you in a new video very soon.